Hello, everybody. This is Jen Leone. If we all think it's a good time to start, I'd love to introduce this panel before I have to jump off for another meeting. Hey, good morning, everybody. I don't have a camera that's functioning. I apologize. For anyone who doesn't know me, this is Jen Leone. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at HPD. We have been working, as many of you know, with Solar One for a couple of years now on our Solar Where Feasible program, which has really been a great program for HPD. We have built a huge amount of capacity around solar. We've gotten a lot of folks to better understand how to integrate solar on affordable housing projects. We've built a lot of solar across our new construction and preservation projects with these partners. And we're so thankful to NYSERDA for helping us with these efforts. Today is a really important new seminar because, as anyone who's been tracking and following things, there has been a lot of talk about new solar incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act. And that's a key part of today's program, is to talk about what do we need to know about solar, what are all the new great things for solar and affordable housing. And also, anyone who's tracking what's going on at the city level, Local Law 97 obviously touches on solar, and there are some interesting things that we need to know about how solar can be utilized to achieve Local Law 97 compliance goals. With that, I will turn this over and unfortunately disappear from this presentation, but I'll turn it over to, I guess, Noah, Kate, and Patrick, who will be telling you guys a lot of interesting things. If anybody does have questions about our program or wants to talk more about this, I can always be found at HPD, and I'm always happy to talk about solar. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Solar One, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Jen.
Great. Thanks, Jen, as always, for kicking us off. So my name is Kate. These are my colleagues, Patrick and Noah, and we're going to be talking through, we'll do some preliminary introductions. We'll talk about solar in New York City and a very brief Solar 101, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we're really going to get into the heart of the matter around the provisions in Local Law 97 as they relate to solar, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. And we'll go through a few case studies to demonstrate how these new incentives are really helpful for solar. And then hopefully we'll have a lot of time for questions. And throughout the panel at any point or throughout the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll try to answer some as we go. And then, we'll pause at certain points and certainly at the end to do further in-depth answers. All right. So to get us started, if you can go to the next slide, Noah. So we're going to do a quick poll just so we have a sense of who's in the room and we can kind of see, our collective knowledge here. So if you can take a minute to answer the poll. So the first question is, have you ever attended one of our Solar One and HPD trainings before? How familiar are you with going solar? What kind of buildings do you work with? And what's your role? We'd love to get a sense. So if you take a second to, you should see the questions pop up. So it looks like there's a lot of folks who have some familiarity, but have never gone solar. And then some folks who have tried to go solar or feel a little bit more familiar. And maybe only one that's regularly working on solar. And then it looks like the majority of folks are in affordable multifamily rental working with affordable multifamily rentals, some supportive housing, and then a little bit of commercial co-ops and condos. That's great. We'll be talking a lot about affordable multifamily rentals. And then we have a lot of affordable developers and owners in the room. Let's see, we've got a mixture, a really great diversity of other roles and industries represented. And so that's great. I think hopefully everyone will be able to take a little bit away from what we're talking about today. And we're really excited to have you here. And it looks like this is the first time for many of you attending our training, so hopefully you come back and join us for more. Okay, so let's, I can share the results and we can move on to the next slide. So just by way of introduction, we work at Solar One, and we are a nonprofit New York City-based organization established in 2004. And our belief is that all New Yorkers can help overcome our environmental challenges. So our programs are our Here Comes Solar program, which we're going to talk about in a second. But we also have educational program. We have our green design labs in schools and do climate education in schools in New York City. And then we also have a really robust workforce training program to get folks trained up and access to green jobs. So our Here Comes Solar program is really our initiative to make solar accessible to high barrier sectors. So folks that have had the hardest time accessing clean energy. So that's particularly affordable housing, but also renters and co-ops. And to do this, we offer technical assistance at every step of the process to try to make solar as simple and affordable as possible. So that includes doing preliminary site assessments and building and solar estimates for buildings, really helping to build knowledge around solar and also consulting on financing and different incentive options. And then for buildings that are moving forward, we can help procure a quality installer who has a good price. And then we're available to help the consumer with advocacy throughout the installation. And so, the way that we've been partnering with HPD, as Jen mentioned, really started in 2019 when the Climate Mobilization Act passed, along with Local Law 97. There were also passed Local Laws 92 and 94, which require green roofs or solar on all new roofs and new roof assemblies. And there was a carve out and a delay for affordable housing, but HPD was really proactive in recognizing the value that solar could bring to affordable housing. And so it implemented the solar where feasible mandate. And so that requires that that an affordable housing building getting financing from HPD goes solar when it's financially beneficial to the building. And so that means with a payback period of 10 years or less. And so NYSERDA funded this partnership with Solar One in HPD to really help carry out that mandate by having us provide free services to any of the buildings in the new construction, preservation, and asset management programs. And so our goal is to really help these buildings, implement solar and include solar and benefit from all the financial savings. And if you click one more time, yep. And so starting in 2024, all new roofs are going to be required to comply with Local Law 9294, regardless of their status, affordability status. So our goal has really been to help educate developers throughout these couple of years so that when that goes into effect in 2024, you're all ready to just include solar as part of the process. So a brief note on solar. As you probably know, the costs have really come down in the past couple of decades. And as the costs have come down, the installations have really grown. And we did see a slight reversal in that trend this past year because of inflation, like with probably everything else you're seeing on construction. But because of all these really great new incentives that we're going to talk about, that's really helped to offset any increases we've seen. And then even though costs have really decreased dramatically for solar, obviously in New York it's a whole different question. There's still a lot of barriers. So buildings, solar faces a lot of construction red tape. It's particularly complex for multifamily buildings, and affordable multifamily buildings are even harder. And then the dense urban environment, like with many things in construction, makes solar more difficult. So we're really here to help ease some of those barriers and reduce them so that solar is affordable and accessible. And I will pass it over to Patrick to take us through a very brief Solar 101.
Thanks, Kate. So one of the great things about solar technology itself is that it's a simple technology. It's easy to maintain, and it's easy to, in its own way, understand. One of the basic things to understand is that we look at solar based off of its warranty and not necessarily based off of its operating life. So every solar panel comes with a standard 25-year warranty. So when we say 25 plus operating life, that's what we mean when we say that. And because of that, because of the solar panels working for at least 25 years, it's always best to have it on new roofs or roofs that have been looked at and maintained so that when solar's existing on your rooftop, it's there for a long time with no problems. Its technology is that it absorbs sunlight and turns it into electric energy with the help of an inverter. So there's very little moving parts and almost no maintenance that goes into it. But because of that, it also requires direct sunlight since that's its own fuel that it uses to generate electric energy. And most importantly, it's tied to the grid. So if there's ever a blackout, ever a time the grid needs to go down for emergency repairs and maintenance, solar goes down as well to keep grid workers safe from potential electric shock. So to go into that whole solar process a little more, the first step is the panels, when they're installed, ready to go, they take in the sunlight, solar photons, the sunlight energy into the panels itself, and it gets converted into electricity. At this stage, it's DC or direct current. It goes down to the second stage, inverter, which is an object that converts electricity from direct current to alternating current. That's the energy we use on a day-to-day basis. The third step is that a meter measures how much solar electricity you're generating on your rooftop and measures that as it gets sent throughout the building. And any unused electricity from the solar panels is sent into the grid. And the grid notes that on your following Con Ed bills with credits, with solar credits for the energy you've generated. There are two different ways to look at how solar can help your building save money. The first is net metering. So the energy that's generated on your rooftop by those same solar panels we're talking about, it's sending energy towards Con Edison's grid. And that energy that you send to the grid gets credited back to you on your Con Ed owner paid bills for your common area as solar credits or dollars that'll help offset the cost of solar energy for your bills, electric energy for your bills. And the second step is, the second way to configure solar is through a community solar type model. So there's two different types. There's on-site and off-site. If it's on-site, it basically starts off operating the same way that you have panels on your rooftop. Energy is getting sent throughout your building. But this energy not only will be used to help for your common area bills, but it can also help tenants, the little guys in your building that live as tenants, can also use some of that solar energy on your rooftop to help save on their bills as well, just like how a building could save on their common area electric bills. The second type is off-site, which is it's energy that's already getting sent to the grid by solar panels on the rooftops, and you're able to tap into that energy remotely in order to save on your Con Ed bills. There's a little more moving parts in that end, but they both do the same thing. There are also three different types of installations. The first is ballasted. It's low profile, meaning low to the ground. And for the vast majority of ballasted installations, they don't require roof penetrations, but as you get to a certain height, there might be some few strategic penetrations just to keep it as safely anchored to the rooftop as possible. But because of this, it's the least expensive of the three different installations to have. And ballast means that there's a weighted material like a cinder block or something that keeps it anchored to the rooftop. The second type is mechanically attached. The two things that you can see immediately is that the panels are a little higher off of the ground, and they're closer together. So what that means is you're able to get more solar production because there's less spacing, which means you can fit more panels on the rooftop. So that no interrow spacing. And it's really good for roofs that don't have a lot of space to work with, or might have a few vents underneath that you can put them over that ballasted can't do. The last one is canopy. It's similar to mechanically attached, but it's raised 9 feet off the ground. So that maintains roof access, which is really important for some buildings to maintain. And you can open it up for parties, for tenants to continue accessing the roof, for to get nice views of the city and things like that. And it helps for FDNY as well, to declare path. So next we're going to look into briefly solar viability. So when we're looking at a rooftop and what makes a rooftop viable for solar, we have a few points that we're always considering. Direct sunlight with minimal shading, because if there's shade going across the panel, that's a panel that's not able to generate as much electricity, so that's less savings overall. A large available roof area. As you saw with the other two designs, mechanically and canopy, there are ways to get around that, but they can be a little more pricey. So what really works best is like a large available roof area. But there's always situations to work around. There's also the fact that the roof is new or as new as possible. If it's a few years old, like 0 to 5, but if it was like 6 to 10, like an extra layer or coating, something like that, to keep it as fresh as possible, because solar can be on your rooftop for at least 25 years. And mechanical equipment is at the north. Since we're in the northern hemisphere, the sun is coming from the south, so we don't want large equipment's shading from the south end, because that blocks a lot more sunlight. And lastly, keeping in mind FDNY's, the fire department's fire paths along the perimeters. So if there's ever a fire, they can get on your rooftop and walk around with ease and assess the situation and help others in need. And there are situations at times where not even a canopy might be too expensive, or planer can't really fit the blueprint of the rooftop. So we have community solar. And this is a way that a building, as well as tenants in the building itself, can subscribe to solar that's not on the roof to help save on their Con Ed bills. Typically, the savings are about 10% for their electric bills. And it's a great way and a great alternative to tapping into solar energy when that access seems like it's not a feasible, tangible thing. And now we're going to look at the different incentives and that go into a solar project itself and the costs about it. So there are some variables that do play a role in how much solar installation is going to cost. One is the system size. And you can see in this column on the left, there are different system sizes as examples. The larger a system can go, the general watt DC per watt pricing goes down in order to help with the general affordability of a solar installation. If it stayed the same throughout, if it's just $5 throughout, then solar would get really expensive as you get larger projects. And this is just a way to make this whole thing make sense. There's the mounting method. Mechanically attached is like the middle in terms of pricing. Ballasted is cheaper, which is why it has that lower price per watt, even though the system is larger. And then there's canopy at the bottom, being the most expensive, just for the amount of steel, height off the ground, and access to the rooftop. There's also prevailing wage and building height that can also add additional pricing. Buildings that are taller, there's more equipment, there's more engineering that goes into that. So the price will go up as a result. And with solar on your rooftop, you're not only able to save on your utility bills for the electric usage, not gas, just electric, but there's also rebates and tax incentives that you can tap into to make the solar installation more affordable and more accessible. When when there's solar projects that are installed directly on your rooftop, you're able to access that savings. And as a result, from having that electric generation on your rooftop, you're able to offset your own owner paid electricity bills, which is a great tool for buildings to be able to tap into. And not only that, with these utility bills savings, like the savings themselves are universal throughout. Like if you had a large building, EL8, EL9, these are like large, like master metered. It could be a Mitchell-Lama or something that's like 15 or 16 like stories, buildings like that, or even small buildings. They can be 6 stories, like 20 units, things like that. Everybody's able to tap into that solar savings, being that their rooftop is available for solar. And these are the different incentives that do come into play with solar projects. There is the NYSERDA Sun incentive that's always able to be tapped into by all buildings, regardless of if it's co-op or condo, nonprofit or for-profit rental. But there are other incentives that may only work for certain projects, like the accelerated depreciation. It's really good for for-profit rentals, but it's basically for that scenario, as for the state tax credits and things like that. And a great thing that happened recently with the Inflation Reduction Act is that going forward, instead of the federal tax credit sunsetting, it's now maintaining at 30%. And depending on your situation, this is really good for affordable housing buildings. You're able to tap into higher levels of savings for a system. It could be 40% for the federal tax credit you could tap into or more. And I'm going to pass it over to Noah, who's going to talk about recent changes to Local Law 97.
Great. Thanks so much, Patrick. And we're going to save all Q&A for the end because we want to make sure we get through all of this new information about Local Law 97 and the Inflation Reduction Act. So we appreciate you guys bearing with us and holding on to your questions. If you have a burning question, definitely use the Q&A function or the chat to ask that question, and we're going to make sure that we get to it at the end. Great. So Local Law 97 was really the signature bill as part of the Climate Mobilization Act that New York City Council passed in 2019. It's an ambitious plan to reduce carbon emissions from New York City's large buildings, reducing those emissions 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Essentially, buildings above 25,000 square feet, starting in 2024, they're going to have an emissions cap or an emissions budget based on the square footage and the use of the space. And if a building exceeds those emissions, then they'll be subject to a penalty of $268 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent beyond the budgeted amount. Certain affordable housing can have alternative compliance pathways using prescriptive measures, but eventually all properties will be covered, all large properties will be covered by Local Law 97. For folks who we just want to point out this great resource, New York City offers a program called the NYC Accelerator that provides resources, training, and free one-on-one consultation and guidance to help building owners come up with a compliance strategy for Local Law 97. You can reach Solar One to talk about solar through HPD or through the Accelerator. But just kind of for a more holistic Local Law 97 compliance consultation or strategy, definitely the Accelerator is a great resource. Another great resource that relates to Local Law 97 is the Local Law 97 Fines Calculator, which is a free online tool hosted by the New York City Building Energy Exchange, where you can actually look up your building or buildings, and based on your benchmarking data that you report to the city, you can get a sense of what kind of fines you might be subject to under Local Law 97. And then you can play out different scenarios like reducing your electricity consumption or your natural gas consumption and seeing how that will change the compliance penalties in the future. So great resource. So now we're going to dive into Local Law 97 and solar. So the law itself that was passed in 2019 says that solar is can be used for Local Law 97 compliance, but there were a lot of open questions. Last month, the New York City Department of Buildings published draft rules that provide a lot of clarifications on the law, and many of those clarifications do relate to solar. So the next two slides that we're presenting are based on the draft rules. Again, they're not final, but this is kind of like late breaking information in those draft rules. And one really helpful thing that the DOB clarified is that if you put solar on a building's roof, that's going to count towards reducing their emissions, regardless of how the meter is configured and regardless of how the system is financed. So if you do a solar roof lease or a power purchase agreement where a third party builds, owns, and operates solar on your rooftop, that will still help your building from a Local Law 97 perspective. And the same is true if you do a cash purchase. It doesn't matter how it's metered either. Okay, so this is that same point, and this is just kind of a visual depiction of hosting community solar. So the solar is on your roof. The bill credits might be applied to other properties or other individual households throughout Con Edison territory, but by virtue of hosting that solar, you get Local Law 97 compliance benefit. Essentially what it's doing is all of the solar energy that you produce on your roof is zero emissions electricity. And so that's subtracted from your building's gross electric consumption, and thereby reducing your carbon footprint. The rules also clarified that subscribing to an offsite community solar project will also count towards Local Law 97 compliance. So for those buildings that maybe have a really small roof or have a really old roof or have a lot of HVAC equipment on the roof, and you can't put solar on top of the roof, then in those situations, you could potentially subscribe to an offsite community solar project to both reduce your electric bills and reduce your Local Law 97 compliance obligations. There's some fine print. So I guess just like by way of background, the law passed in 2019. The law established the Local Law 97 Advisory Board, and their working groups have been working for a long time to inform the rules. The draft rules that were released in October can be found on New York City's website. They're linked here. And the rules are going to be finalized by January. So we will have certainty very soon. There are a few caveats that relate to solar. So if you're subscribing to an offsite community solar project for the purpose of Local Law 97, it's important that that solar project be located within Con Edison, New York City. So in theory, you can subscribe to a solar project in Westchester. That might lower your electric bill. It's not going to lower your Local Law 97 compliance obligation. It needs to be connected to New York City. Another caveat is that if the owner of a solar PV system retires the RECs, the renewable energy credits associated with the project, then it won't have any compliance value aside from those RECs. We don't think that's going to happen very frequently. We think most buildings and most developers of solar will opt to allow the building hosting the solar or the building purchasing the solar energy to take the Local Law 97 benefit. But again, this is an important nuance that if RECs are retired, then nobody else gets compliance value. And then just another thing to be mindful of is that as written in the draft rules, because solar is directly offsetting grid electricity, as the grid gets cleaner in future compliance periods, the compliance value of solar could decrease. Now, this is something that Solar One has been advocating for, creating a floor value and trying to ensure that solar provides long-term compliance value. But we'll see what the final rules say in January. And then the next two slides are just two examples. So this is a mid-sized multifamily rental property that it's a made-up example, but their Local Law 97 penalty starting in 2024 would be about $10,000 if they were to install a 100 kilowatt solar installation on the roof. In addition to reducing their electricity costs by $16,000 a year, they would also eliminate almost all of their Local Law 97 penalties because they're going to be directly reducing the building's net electricity consumption and therefore its carbon footprint. So that's just to highlight, that you get almost as much compliance value from your solar as you get electricity bill savings. This other example is a co-op that is master metered, but it's got these are tall buildings with small rooftops. So in the case of this co-op, they're facing bigger penalties starting 2024 of $116,000 a year. If they were to subscribe to an offsite community solar project, this is for a 400 give or take kilowatt solar project that would produce about 500,000 kilowatt hours of electricity annually. That would provide them with about $7,000 of annual electricity bill savings, but it would provide them with almost $40,000 of compliance value because that solar energy that they're purchasing from an offsite project allows them to reduce their building's net electricity consumption that they're reporting when they benchmark. So that's an overview of Local Law 97. We anticipate getting lots of questions about it, and we're happy to get into those. But next, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Kate, who's going to provide an overview of some exciting new developments through the Inflation Reduction Act.
Great, thanks, Noah. So, so the Inflation Reduction Act, as you probably know, is a huge bill and has a ton of provisions. Today, we're really going to focus on those that relate to solar. And so we're not going to talk too much about energy efficiency, but I just wanted to highlight that there are a ton of energy efficiency incentives in this bill. So there's rebates, including the homes rebate for energy efficiency homeowners and multifamily housing. There's rebates for electrification for LMI households, and then there's a ton of tax credits, including the energy efficient commercial building tax credit and a home builder tax credit. And one thing to note is a lot of, for example, the home builder tax credit, New York City already has pretty stringent requirements around energy efficiency. And so because of our EGC process, a lot of buildings will automatically qualify for some of these tax credits because they're already meeting Energy Star standards. So I wanted to put this here because I know HPD is going to be working really hard to distill down all these available incentives as they are, as more guidance comes out and as the funding flows down through the states. So for those of you that are doing energy efficiency and working with affordable housing, stay tuned for that. Energy efficiency is not our specialty, so I'm going to switch to solar, but they obviously go hand in hand. So there's three major pieces of the IRA that we want to highlight as they relate to solar. The first is the federal tax credit, or the ITC, that, as Patrick mentioned, was just increased and extended. So that's a huge, that provides a huge amount of certainty, and we're going to talk about that next. But the other two pieces, one is direct pay, which really opens up a whole new world for tax credits that nonprofits are now able to benefit from. And then transferability, which also allows for a lot more flexibility in how the tax credits can be used and sold. So first, I'm going to talk about the ITC, or the federal tax credit. So as I said, the federal tax credit base was just increased to 30%. So many of you know it was starting to sunset last year. It was 26% and then scheduled to step down. But because of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's now increased to 30% and extended to 2032, which just provides 10 years a level of certainty that we just don't usually have in the solar world. So that is really allows us to plan ahead. The one thing to note is that the residential energy credit, which is a solar tax credit for homeowners, for co-ops, or condos and residential buildings, that was also increased to 30%. But that's the only increase. And I'm going to talk about some other bonuses that are not available for that residential energy credit, but they still benefit from that 30%. And then just to note that this tax credit is available in the year in which installation of the solar property is complete. And it now includes standalone battery storage as well as utility interconnection costs, both which are not so common in New York City, but hopefully we'll see more battery. And if there are bigger projects that have interconnection costs, that can now be bundled as part of the tax credit. And I should note that this 30% base is currently in effect. So that includes projects that are completed this year. The rest of the bonuses I'm going to talk about are beginning next year in 2023. So the first bonus is a 10% bonus for location in a low-income census tract. And this, the census tracts are determined by the new market tax credit map. If you can go to the next slide, Noah. So this is what the 2015 new market tax credit map looks like. And as you can see, a huge portion of New York City obviously is included in this. A lot of the guidance and the details about these bonuses are being written right now. We've submitted comments, lots of folks are advocating. And so we expect guidance to be released in early 2023. And that will outline, are they going to update the maps? Is it going to stay as the 2015? Some of those census tracts might change as neighborhoods have been changing. But I think it's still safe to say a large portion of New York City will fall in that, in these census tracts. So buildings can either take that 10% bonus on top of the 30% base, or there's a 20% bonus for certain types of building projects. So the first type is a low-income residential building project. So this is affordable housing, federally funded affordable housing for rental buildings where the solar benefits are allocated equitably to residents. So we don't know exactly what allocated equitably means yet. We're waiting for the IRS to release guidance on the definitions. But we think that, and we're hopeful that for a lot of affordable housing projects, they will be able to qualify with this. The other type of building project is the qualified low-income economic benefit project. And this is a community solar project where half the subscribers have low incomes or incomes below 80% of the AMI. And so this is in that configuration that Patrick mentioned, where you're sending solar to tenants, either on-site or off-site. If at least half those tenants or subscribers are low income, you could qualify for that 20% boost. And that's great because we really do want to incentivize community solar so that more folks can access the benefits of affordable clean energy. And so you can either take the 10% or the 20%, but both are stackable on top of 30% base credit. And I should know that there's 1.8 gigawatts total allocated for these bonus credits, and they're going to require some kind of application. We don't know exactly what that'll look like. We're hoping and kind of pushing for a very simplified application so that these are things we can that buildings can access. But we're going to have to wait for guidance from that and the qualifications in 2023. So on top of those adders, there is also a stackable adder for domestic content. And so what this means is that a solar project that uses 100% of its steel and iron from domestic production would qualify, as well as it requires a kind of increasing percentage of manufactured components that are mined, produced, or manufactured in the US. And it also requires that projects, like huge projects over 1 megawatt, have to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So we know this is going to take a while for the US manufacturing industry to have enough industry to be able to supply these projects. So this is more down the road, but we do hope it spurs domestic manufacturing. And while most projects in New York City are not over 1 megawatt, we think that's a great effort to ensure that those big projects do provide good paying jobs and kind of clean jobs to folks. And the final stackable adder is for something called an energy community. So this is another 10% that can be stackable on the other adders. And this is either on a brownfield site or in census tracts that have a very long and complex combination of people with employment in the coal or gas industry, or unemployment rate, or proximity to former coal and gas facilities. So this was really intended to help ensure a just transition for formerly fossil fuel-based communities to transition. And on the next page, this is a map we found where there's no official map yet from the IRS about what qualifies, but different groups have tried to put together a matrix of what qualifies, and it's not as much not as many communities are going to qualify in New York City, but we do think there will be some around the ports and different industrial sites that might be eligible for that extra 10%. All right, so the next great provision in the IRA is the direct pay. And this is really intended so that federally exempt 501c3 nonprofits can receive the tax credits as a cash payment from the US Treasury. So this is a huge unlocking of those tax credits for nonprofits that formerly couldn't take advantage of them. And, it's going to appear basically as a tax refund. The caveat is that joint ventures or partnerships where there's a for-profit entity won't be eligible for direct pay because of they have a for-profit that could take the tax credit. And then just to note, it's also available for state and tribal governments and rural cooperatives, not as relevant to New York City, but a great benefit as well. And so this, so just to say that this is really big for nonprofits and is really changing the way we can now talk about the incentives available for nonprofits for solar. Transferability is the other piece that is now made available because of the IRA. So what this means is that where previously, if you are a nonprofit and you wanted to, sell your tax credits, you needed a tax credit partnership. Often people did it through their, low-income housing tax credit partners. And now the tax credits can be sold on an open market to any third party instead of just that tax credit partnership. And so that's going to really reduce legal and transaction costs and just really open up the market for solar tax credits. And so there's going to be a broader range of investors who can take that tax credit now. And it allows the building to stay as 100% owner. And the building can still take the losses and depreciation, even if they're selling off the tax credits. And so the IRS is going to issue guidance on transferability as well as direct pay in 2023. We just want to emphasize that there's a lot to still figure out. But we think this could be really beneficial, particularly for those nonprofits that are maybe doing joint ventures or partnering with a for-profit entity. So they can't get direct pay, they could still do transferability or transfer the tax credits. Or if a nonprofit or if a for-profit doesn't have enough liability to take tax credit, they could benefit from this transferability provision. All right, and then finally, just a few notes on how the ITC and low-income housing tax credits work together, a lot of acronyms. So now solar can be included as eligible basis for both the LIHTC and ITC, which is huge. Previously, we weren't allowed to kind of claim the full solar system for both. And so that means that if you're taking, 4% low-income housing tax credits and combining it with that, let's say the 30% base credit, ultimately over 10 years because of the LIHTCs and the ITC, the tax credits are covering up to 70% of the total project cost. So that's huge for affordable housing. And then also because of transferability, if the LIHTC investor doesn't want to buy the solar tax credits, you can transfer them to another third party. All right, so we just wanted to highlight kind of how this works in practice, particularly with our solar feasibility analysis tools that we have through HPD. And then I'm going to try to stop so we have about 10 minutes for questions. And yes, we're going to make slides available. We will send out the slides after so you can really dig into these provisions. All right, so this, for those of you, probably a lot of you recognize this, but if you don't, this is a kind of screenshot of our solar feasibility analysis. And this is a tool we developed with HPD for the solar where feasible mandate primarily that allows you to put building inputs into the tool, and then it tells you if solar is feasible and what the payback period is, what the savings are. We use this for solar where feasible mandate, but it's also available for buildings to use if they're in the preliminary stages and just want to really understand how solar might benefit the project. So this is an example of a for-profit affordable multifamily rental. And what I want to highlight here is, this is a for-profit, so they typically can take the tax credit. They can typically benefit from accelerated depreciation. And then let's say that this is a project that's located in one of those low-income new market tax credit census tracts. So we put the federal tax credit to 40%. It's that 30% base plus the 10% adder. So what that shows us, go to the next slide, Noah, is this is the results page. So typically with solar, you're seeing utility bill savings in this scenario. Let's say it's about a 46 kilowatt system, seeing about $6,600 in savings a year in electricity. And then you're seeing, because of that federal investment tax credit at 40%, seeing $35,000 in the tax credit, seeing benefits from depreciation. So after all the incentives and tax credits are taken into account, the system is really only $16,000 and has a 3-year payback, which is extremely low and really beneficial. And for-profits, usually, like before the IRA, were already benefiting from the tax credit and depreciation. And so now it's just a bigger boost and a bigger credit to the project. And this tool, I should just mention, is available on the HPD Solar Where Feasible website. There's lots of links. There's trainings on how to use it, but you can find it there. And this is just a cash flow statement. So really just to highlight, you're getting the net electricity bill savings, you're getting the federal tax credit at 40%. And then you can see that the payback period is just taking 3 years to essentially cover the cost of the system. So that is great. But it's not just great for profit, it's also really beneficial for nonprofits. So before the passage of the IRA, when we were filling out this tool for nonprofits, typically they could not take the solar tax credit. So you can see here, we said that we switched that to yes because of the direct pay provisions and because of the transferability options. And then let's say this was a nonprofit project that had so much solar, so 75 kilowatts, pretty big system, that they decided to distribute the credits to residents in the building. So they're getting that 20% bonus on top of the 30 for a total tax credit of 50%. And because they're distributing, they're getting a higher NYSERDA incentive, so $2 a watt. So these are really big incentives. And so the results, showed tons of savings. So with a system that size, you're looking at around $10,000 in savings a year in electricity costs. And then you're looking at a payback period of just 4 years. And that's because the federal investment tax credit can now be either received through direct pay, or it can be transferred and used as a source. And so the cost after the incentives and taxes is $43,000. So, prior to the IRA, this nonprofit probably wouldn't have been able to benefit from that federal investment tax credit. It would have been a higher, maybe 8 or 9 year payback period. But all these provisions really allow for nonprofits to really benefit economically from solar projects now. And here again is just the cash flow that we don't have to go into detail in, but it just shows that now they can benefit from the federal tax credit. All right, that was a lot of information, but we wanted to make sure to get through as much as possible. And we will open it up for questions. So we have a couple that were answered. Yes, I'm going to share the slides. And then does the warranty cover? Yeah, we talked about the warranties. I mentioned in the chat. Inverters come with their own warranties typically. So, and then the next question is there any anticipation that buildings under 25,000 square feet will become subject to local law 97 or similar mandate? Noah, do you know?
That's a great question. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that, I would not be surprised. It seems like the trend, the big long-term trends that we see is that the city and the state are basically trying to stop fossil fuel combustion in buildings in New York City and across the state. So they want to electrify heating and cooling, and they want the grid to be powered by both large scale and distributed renewables. So I will not be surprised if that happens. I'm not aware of an active effort for that happening, in the immediate term.
Any other questions about either Local Law 97 or Inflation Reduction Act or solar in general? Tried so hard to get through in time for questions. Come on, there's got to be something.
Okay, we've got a question from Gabe. Thanks, Gabe. Do you have a sense of how the tax credit transfer will be processed? That's a great question, Gabe, and we're not sure. I think, what we Solar One have advocated for in our comments was to make it simple, to make transferability simple, and to limit liability for the buyer of a solar tax credit, so that they really, so it's not super expensive or prohibitive. And I think the intent of transferability is to really open up the market and make it so that really anyone with an income tax bill, a commercial entity with an income tax bill, could buy a solar tax credit. And therefore there's going to be just like a better market for it. And, for every dollar of tax credit, maybe a building owner that sells the tax credit could get, say, 80, 90 cents in the dollar.
The next question is, any idea if condos and co-ops will be punished for the energy usage of the commercial spaces in them? Currently, their local law 97 numbers include those commercial spaces. That's
a good question that I truthfully don't know the answer to. I think Molly, that might be a great question. I would recommend getting in touch with the New York City Accelerator and having them speak with you about your specific building. Because in addition to being able to answer that question, they might also be able to identify some low-hanging fruit energy conservation measures that you could adopt to limit risk for your building anyhow. Arshad is asking a great question about HPD regulatory agreements. The question is, how does integrating solar work with the restrictions and receiving consent from HPD? I wish that Jennifer Leone was here to handle this question, but what I can say is that HPD has been a great partner and big supporter of solar. We're aware of projects that have ran into some challenges relating to regulatory agreements for third-party financed solar. So where a building owner would lease their rooftop to a third-party solar developer, or would enter into a power purchase agreement where a third party puts solar on the roof and sells it to the building. We've seen some of those regulatory approvals be a little bit tricky, although they seem to, generally speaking, come through. With the direct pay provision in the IRA, we're not sure how common the leases and power purchase agreements will be relative to direct ownership, which we anticipate will be easier to get the regulatory approvals for. I'm sure, again, there's probably still going to be lots of cases where a lease or a power purchase agreement makes sense. And this is one of the things that we're excited to be working on with HPD and their partner at HDC, is thinking about how can the agencies really help to streamline their processes to make it more accessible and more affordable for folks to install solar.
I can take the next question from Brendan. The question is, how competitive do you expect the 10% adder to be for affordable housing? It's my understanding there's going to be a finite amount of funds available. So yeah, there is a annual allotment, 1.8 megawatts of the credits for that 10% and that 20% adder. We don't know how competitive it's going to be yet, and we don't know what the application process will be like. We have advocated to make it simple, and also we're hoping, and I don't know what it will be like, but perhaps there'll be, or we asked for like a sort of prioritization for affordable housing in those census tracts, but we don't know is the point, and we'll find out when the guidance comes out how competitive it will be. But yes, there is a finite amount in its annual allocation.
Great. And Joanna asks a great question. Do you think solar tax credits can be added to projects that are currently in construction and past HPD closing? I would say yes. Basically, again, every project is different, but we've helped integrate solar into projects after closing many times. It's actually worked out quite well for buildings that had unallocated contingency budget, or de-scoped a green roof or something like that, and had funds for solar. But fundamentally, if you install solar, then that is eligible for the investment tax credit and could be claimed the year following installation. And the same is true for the NYSERDA incentive, which again is a nice source that covers in many cases like half the cost of solar. So Joanna, happy to speak with you offline about your project and see if there's a way we can support.
And just to add to that, if the solar panels go on this year, then that project would be eligible for that 30%, because that portion of the Inflation Reduction Act applies to buildings closing or finalizing installation this year. Starting next year is when the bonuses will be available. But so that's great for that particular project.
Okay, we've got a question from Arshad. Can purchasing electricity from a renewable provider satisfy a building's local law 97 requirement? Arshad, this is something of a hotly contested question. First, if you buy from like Green Mountain Energy or something like that, or some supplier that says that they source RECs, but those RECs are from wind projects in Texas or something to that effect, no, that doesn't do anything for local law 97 compliance. You could purchase RECs from a large, like offshore wind or large scale renewables project that is delivering electricity to New York City. There are many such projects that are planned, including bringing hydropower down from Quebec, offshore wind, and large scale renewables from upstate. So we do think some buildings will do that for compliance. And there's an ongoing debate about how much buildings should be able to rely on RECs for compliance versus doing energy conservation measures within the buildings.
We have a hand raised in the chat. Yolande, do you want to ask a question? Don't know. I'm not sure if that's working. If you do have a question, feel free to write it in the chat.
Oh, hi, sorry. I do have a question.
Sure.
My question is, part of my roof is shaded. I want to know if if I have the chance, can I put some canopy in certain areas and regular panels and the other areas that's not as shaded?
That's a great question. It really depends on the roof, but absolutely, depending on how much the shading is, that is, you might be able to, to configure different height arrays. I definitely encourage you to reach out to us. We can do a further assessment and help figure out if that would be a possibility. But yeah, perfect. There's creative ways to get around shading in some cases.
And
thank you.
And Mirlande, actually, the photo that we have up on the screen is a hybrid system that has a partial canopy, partially mechanically attached system, which is a lower cost installation method. In this case, it was done to get landmarks approval to minimize visibility, but there are definitely cases where that can be done.
Yeah, so that's why I brought it up, because looking at this canopy, they have different level of the height. And I'm presuming it's because of shade, right?
Shade and landmarks approval, yeah.
Okay, I see. Perfect. Thank you.
Great, sure.
Brendan asks a question on the HPD side. Will avoiding local law 97 fines be an adequate argument for utilizing replacement or operating reserve funds to finance projects? Brandon, that's an excellent question. And the honest answer is that we don't know, but we're excited to be engaging with HPD and their partners in the development community to explore these ideas, because I think it is a great point that's embedded within your question, which is that, if a building would otherwise be subject to fines, then, the value of putting solar on that building is even greater than just the economic benefit of the bill savings.
And we're a couple minutes over. I think we're happy to stay on for a couple more minutes to answer questions as they come up. But I just wanted to thank everyone so much. If you need to jump, Thanks for joining us. Like I said, we're going to stay on for a couple more minutes to answer questions, but always feel free to reach out to us at affordable@solar1.org. And if you have more questions about the IRA or Local Law 97, and we look forward to hearing from you. But yeah, we can take a couple more questions.
Great.
Bill, this
Oh, sorry, Kate. Okay, Amanda asks a question about building integrated photovoltaics, which for those who are less familiar, it's basically solar panels that are a building material. So they could be integrated into a facade or a window. And the question is, are there any stipulations that it's only for rooftop solar? I don't believe so. I think that building integrated solar absolutely would be eligible for the investment tax credit.
I also wanted to mention, I forgot to say this during the, when I was reviewing the solar feasibility analysis, but the tool, the solar feasibility analysis tool, we're currently working on updates to that so that they include the provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. So you can make adjustments in the inputs to reflect that. But if you have questions about it or want to use that tool just for any building project, doesn't have to be HPD related, just feel free to reach out to us and we can always make the required changes to see what it would qualify for with the new provisions.
Charlie asks a great question. Is there a cap on the ITC or investment tax credit amount? No, the incentive is, the base incentive, that 30% is uncapped. So any project, any size will qualify for 30% of the total development cost as an investment tax credit. The adders, the low income adders specifically are capped at 1.8 gigawatts per year across the whole country. So theoretically, it's possible that an affordable housing solar project might not, secure an adder in a given tax year, depending on the forthcoming application process. But generally speaking, it's uncapped.
All right, we have a question. Can you remind us about your firm and what you do? Are you an installer? So we are a nonprofit organization and we are not installers. We provide technical assistance to help kind of help all the different steps of assessing your building for solar, as well as, we can help you find a qualified solar installer. So absolutely, if you have affordable housing projects, reach out to us. What we'll do is help do a preliminary assessment and then figure out the best way to procure an installer for your project. All right, well, with that, I will just wrap us up. Thank you all so much for staying on, even overtime. We're excited to continue being in communication once we get guidance from the government about all the provisions of the IRA. I'm sure we'll do another webinar, and we're always here to answer questions throughout about your affordable housing solar projects, about your solar projects in general. And thanks so much for joining us.